Morning, Ruby. Good morning, Drew.
Good morning.
Hey, Drew. You're muted.
Good thing, because an ambulance or a fire truck just went by.
How was your vacation?
Vacation was great. Yeah, was just talking with our admin.
Oh, there you
Oh yeah, now it's coming by somebody else's office.
go. Probably Janine's.
Janine's
How are you,
in
Janine?
Dallas.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Sharita. How are you?
Oh, I'm glad I did that. I can't hear anything. Let me see here.
Morning, Helen.
Okay. We need some more folks.
How are we supposed to plan and make policies? Jeez.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Ruby, have you heard from anybody?
I sent out the links to everyone. Ebony's coming in.
Oh, that's Ebony.
Maybe everybody's like me and they forgot that the link is actually in the calendar invite and not in the other overall email that you used to send out. I had trouble finding it this morning because I didn't look in the calendar.
Jerome Stevens asked me for the link this morning, so I've resent it to him.
Good
Good morning.
Good morning,
morning.
Ebony. Good morning, Tammy.
Good morning, guys.
I think we're at quorum, right, Ruby? Six, but we need 7.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, 12. 6, we need 7.
In the meantime, I think the first thing on our agenda is the review of the minutes. I could not find them on Friday, but I was also trying to do 10,000 things on Friday at the same time. So I haven't even read the minutes. And I can't remember.
Who did the minutes? Does anybody remember?
I've not seen any minutes, just saying. I didn't do them.
Fair enough.
I don't know. It's a good question. Who did the minutes?
Christy?
Will we re-elect the new secretary?
What's that, Ruby?
Will we elect the new secretary? After Casey left?
I
No.
don't think we ever picked one.
I don't think we had any volunteers, and I think Colin was just doing them by default, is what I think happened. Is that correct, Colin?
Yeah, something like that. I don't think I did them in June though.
Yeah, I don't think I did them in June.
I think Christy did do them the last meeting.
Yeah, I thought she volunteered too, because I was kind of like the guy who did the dishes and broke all the china the last time I did minutes.
That's one way of getting out of
I
getting out of doing it in the future.
wasn't trying to get out of doing it. It was just so overly simple and not enough detail. It was like, all right, Colin's minutes are worthless.
I think we have quorum now.
All right. How are you, Colleen? Welcome.
Oh, great. Oh, yeah, we are at
Jerome's in?
quorum.
Awesome.
I will officially call our meeting to order at 10:35.
Mhm.
I don't think that we have minutes for our last meeting. Colin, do you think it's any hope that we'll be able to get anything from Christy? Or you think all that stuff is gone because she's gone?
Well, we have the meeting recorded. We can always, I mean, worst case scenario, Ruby and or me and or our new team member, and we'll introduce our new team member, Melissa. If you give me a moment, sort of over Ruby's shoulder, it's hard to see her.
I'm still
Melissa,
here.
Melissa Hernandez is the newest member of our team. She is the new coordinator on the homeless services team. So she will be helping us with a lot of those, coordination stuff that Ruby used to do and has been doing. A lot of that is in the process of shifting over to Melissa. She started with us last week. So please don't scare her away. We would like to keep her for a while. She's awesome.
Yes, she is. Colin, I took notes at the June meeting. I'll probably can type them up and we can go from there.
Okay.
Okay, so we can review them in the next meeting,
Yes, we can do it.
if all are okay with that.
Would
Oh,
would anybody like to volunteer to be the official note taker of the group?
Colin, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I think it would make sense, subcommittees to have secretaries and so forth seems maybe a little much. I mean, it's always struck me that having some of the staff, community development staff, who are sort of to do minutes, but beyond that, sort of in terms of whoever does minutes, I think it would be a great way of in a way sort of efficiently reviewing them. To start, if we start each meeting with somebody who can kind of pull out any action items from the previous meeting or things that are still kind of hanging out, right? That we would start with a slide of whatever action items, were, or maybe we have just kind of an ongoing tracker of sort of action items and timelines and who's supposed to be doing what. I've, almost 99% of the time find sort of the pretense of reviewing several pages of minutes to be sort of a non-helpful fiction that also isn't a very organized way of keeping track of what we say we're going to be doing. So I mean, those are just two ideas, and even if community development staff don't end up doing the minutes, maybe they could be the ones who organize the tracker of kind of the to-do list to keep us a little more organized.
Sure. I think we can look at doing that.
Just a thought. Thank you.
And we are not going to do verbatim minutes. These are all just action minutes. So it's just, here's, to Drew's point, if we're going to do this, this is what we talked about. These were the decisions made. These were the decisions tabled for the time being. If the group's comfortable with that, I think, let me talk with Ruby and Melissa and see if that's something we can take on. I know all of us have a ton of stuff to do, and I think unless anybody wants to take notes today, I think we can pull together today. Ruby, Melissa, are you guys okay doing some basic
We're
notes?
taking notes.
All right, thank you.
thanks so much.
All right, action notes it is, simple to the point, and we'll use those to generate action items for the next agenda. Thank you, Drew, for the recommendations. Sharita, sorry. Let me turn it back over to our chair.
So I can turn it back over to you, right? The next item on our agenda is my update on our homeless count to date, as far as the wait list. Colin, do you have that ready for us?
I do not. I will have to dig into where Hanalea pulled those numbers. I thought she'd asked Levette to pull those. She's not here. So I may have to email those after the meeting if that would be all right with you, Sharita. I just haven't pulled the reports and I'm not familiar with the report because it's not a standard report that I use on a regular basis in the HMIS. It'll take me a minute
Right.
Do it. I just haven't.
Do
had-
we need to let folks know that right now, like the wait list might look longer than it normally does because of our issues at UMD? Because I don't know if everybody's up to speed on that.
Sure. For those who are not aware, Urban Ministries is in a COVID outbreak. Last I heard, I think there were 7 positives as of last Friday. So they are not taking any individuals into the Liberty Street location as they're trying to get that COVID outbreak under control. And I asked Sheldon if they'd be willing to or able to add some extra extra rooms over at their non-congregate shelter. And just due to some staffing challenges right now, they're unable to add extra space over there. So we're just kind of in a holding pattern right now. And hoping and praying, and I seeing your note, Sharita, that there were no masks. Do you know if they've got masks over there or if people are just choosing not to wear them?
I cannot answer that question. I think the day that it was new, like maybe for a couple of days when it was very fresh and new, there was a table at the door with somebody handing masks, and I haven't seen that table
Okay.
since early last week. And so when I walked in this morning, there were several. They were, people were still walking out, and either people had their mask on their arm, under their chin, or none at all.
Okay.
Which is very frustrating to me because I have to walk through this building to get to my clinic. That is very frustrating. But it also means that we have to like wear extra stuff now in clinic, which is not fun.
I do have 5 or 6 big, huge boxes of N95 masks I can drop off over to UMD if you want, or do you want any? Sharita, to
I
hold?
think that I think because I don't like there used to be a point when we would have a standing meeting where I would at least get updates, and we haven't done that in quite some time. So I don't want to say that they don't have them. I didn't hear staff encouraging people to put them on or keep them on. It might just be that simple.
Okay.
But folks are getting, we've been doing this almost 3 years, and lots of folks are just getting so desensitized to it. It makes it very difficult unless, staff and leadership is in, pushing and insisting that folks mask up.
True. All right. I will, I made a note. I'll reach out to Sheldon and Shona and try and find out what the status is. And if they need some masks, I'll get some to them.
All right.
Right.
I lost my agenda. Let me find it.
All right. I apologize for not getting an agenda out to all
You
of
sent
you.
it to me. Yeah.
And we do have a few items.
So the NOFA is the next thing on the agenda, the unsheltered NOFA. And there was, do you have the 1-page description to share
I do.
on screen? Okay.
Yep, I was going to walk through that and I'll send this out later. Wanted to kind of set the tone and context before I sent this email out, which is just a 1-page overview of the unsheltered NOFO. Boyd is taking the lead on coordinating the community response to the unsheltered NOFO, which is about $2 million. One of the challenges that there's a couple challenges we have to put together. One, we have to write up to a 15-page document of how we are going to plan to respond to unsheltered homelessness. Part of that plan involves how are we going to better leverage a variety of resources in the community, including medical providers. So we have reached out to Lincoln, and Sharita is trying to get us connected to their CEO to sort of codify what does Lincoln do dollars and cents wise for unsheltered homeless individuals in Durham. We've reached out to Helen and community paramedics, and she has agreed to work with Jim Groves and her department leadership to try and codify what community paramedics are doing to help those who are unsheltered. And one of the tasks that we really need to do is kind of pull together a think tank of folks, and wanted to start with the Policy and Planning Committee and walk through this document so that you guys can see what's happening and determine who on the committee would like, if anybody on the committee would like to be part of discussions that we need to have over the next several weeks or month to put together what this plan will look like. So let me walk you through where this is. Hang on a second. Okay. Can you all see this? So one of the things that we need to look at is leveraging housing resources. This is something that I would like the committee, and Lloyd and I were talking about it. We talked to DHA about this as well, because part of this is we can get 18 points if we are able to create some number of permanent housing units for people experiencing homelessness, like PSH units. And as you'll recall, we've been talking for years about the need for more permanent supportive housing. The challenge has been how to pay for the supportive services and how to pay the rental amounts. This application would allow us to apply for the supportive services piece if we're able to also find perhaps another way to pay the rent for permanent supportive housing rental units. Talking with DHA, you know, the continuum of care does have up to 225 vouchers available to us and we are currently working our way up to using all of them. I don't have the exact number of how many of those vouchers are in use. However, it does seem like there might be 10 to 15 vouchers available that perhaps Policy and Planning might want to say a priority would be set for those 10 to 20 or 10 to 15 vouchers to be set aside for permanent supportive housing if funds are awarded through this NOFO for the supportive services. And that would also assume that somebody is applying for those supportive services. It would be a way of meeting our needs and also sort of helping us score well on this point, on this application. So that's something for us to consider as a Policy and Planning Committee to make that recommendation and take to the HSAC to do that, because we are expected to leverage funding sources other than COC funds, and housing choice vouchers are the easiest for us to tap into at this point, because we don't have, you know, any other pots of money sitting there. You know, we don't have like a healthcare pot of money or a Duke affordable housing trust that we're pulling from. So that's.
So Colin, just as it relates to that, and working with our unsheltered folks, is there included potentially in this, you know, funding for supportive services once those people get housed? Especially, you know, as we speak about housing choice vouchers being our only option, a lot of our folks are not ready for housing choice voucher level housing. And it takes a lot of work, I know, because once their rapid rehousing teams and all of those other people go away, once they've been housed 6 or 7 or 8 months, if they're patients in this clinic, I'm it. And I'm the one that is navigating and helping them stay housed if they don't have the ability to go back to those services for assistance.
So yes, this NOFO would provide funding for those supportive services and would allow additional supportive services, which could also go back into this second point here of leveraging healthcare resources. So if this is something we want to do and we need more than just a regular housing case manager, this may be an opportunity for us to go to Alliance and say, hey, would you commit, you know, through your partners or Southlight or one of the other behavioral healthcare groups to say, hey, yes, we'll commit X number of staff hours per week to work with people in a PSH program. Should these funds be awarded, and accessed. So yes, does that answer your question, Sharita?
It does if the person is eligible for that level of care.
Okay.
But if they're not eligible, then you have a whole nother issue. And a lot of our folks, if they don't have Medicaid, they're not eligible.
Okay.
So you got to think about that, because a lot of those people that are getting enhanced services are Medicaid. They already have Medicaid. We have a ton of our population who they don't qualify for Medicaid. They're not able to meet a disabled adult status. Therefore, they do not have access to, even if they have an alliance provider, it's usually just medication management. Very few clients get therapy. And if you need an ACT team or CST, there's a wait list for state funds. And I think right now there are no state funds to pay for folks who are uninsured.
Okay. So would it be worth maybe, let's say we were going to set aside or sort of make available 15, we'd make available 15 vouchers. And out of that 15, maybe 5 to 8 of them would be specifically targeted to people who have Medicaid so that they could get a full range of services. Would that be helpful? Because if you've got the Medicaid.
Well, if a person
need-
has an ACT team, as a part of the ACT service is a housing specialist. So for them, they're gonna have a housing specialist. Now, whether that housing specialist position is filled,
Mhm.
is a different story. Whether the housing person is versed and knows the housing continuum for Durham, the whole other question.
Okay.
So I just think that, when we think this out, we need to think about the bulk of our population and looking at them as folks who may not meet
Mhm.
that, don't have, it's not necessarily doesn't mean that they can't get it, but at the current time, they don't meet that insured status, because that becomes very crucial to supportive services for folks.
Okay. So what if there's, all right, that's helpful. Thank you.
I just want you to think about that, because I think we always have an idea in our mind of what we think just naturally works. But
Mhm.
if you don't know like the full gamut of what that looks like and who gets left out,
Yeah.
then you don't want to be appropriating a lot of funds to a service that really necessarily doesn't need it. You know what I'm saying? And you
Mhm.
need to be looking at, what about all the people who don't get that? What do they get?
Well, my thought would be if you have an ACT team, it sounds like the only thing that wouldn't be available through that ACT team would be paying for rent. Is that right?
Pretty much.
So,
Unless they, they could try the ILI process, but once Alliance runs out of money, that's it. They would do mainstream resources, and then that would be it.
okay, so what we could do is cross-reference, those who are on a PSH waiting list and say, okay, hey, these people are waiting for PSH. They've got an ACT team. Here's a voucher getting them into the PSH program over here. That's being, these supportive services are being provided through the ACT team. There might still be a, PSH case manager, a street outreach case manager who continues with them for a minute just to ensure that everything's running smoothly. I hear what you're saying is trying to get the two connected through the HMIS and reporting might be difficult, but we can think it through. So I guess the question is, do we want to make available some number of units to help us increase our points? Because 10 out of 18 points is coming from us being able to commit some units here and there from this. We're also looking at working with Peter Skillern, who's in the process of purchasing a hotel, to make some percentage of those units available, and perhaps a few units at Harriet's Place and several other developments that are going up, as sort of being able to figure out how to make some of those units available. We of course have to figure out how to pay for the units, but we would at least have some partnerships that we could put into place and put into writing that show that we do have a commitment of units being available, assuming there's funding.
Colin, just a thought. Although this would sort of continue the COVID era kind of flip-flop on some level, right, of city funding services and county funding structural things, right? And we talked a couple of weeks ago about some level sort of trying to get back to maybe a more historical model where the county is funding services and the city is funding new development of new sort of structures. But nonetheless, you know, if there's significant HUD funding here and perhaps elsewhere for supportive services, right? We are anticipating having some PSH related opportunities in the next county ARPA RFP to come out, right? I mean, and you know, all other things being equal, right? We might have hoped for those to sort of be aimed at funding services, but if we have this other money funding, you know, that's potentially available to fund services, it might be that folks would agree to kind of target some of that at opportunities to build more, right? So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think that's good to think about, Drew. And just these funds don't actually come through the city.
Yeah.
These will be direct contracts with HUD. We just have to facilitate the application.
Oh, okay.
So these follow basically what we do with our regular continuum of care. So we won't necessarily be really stepping outside of our normal role on these HUD funds.
But I mean, it is an important point in general, right? Regardless of who would be creating new housing, right? But that we just can't, it's very hard to use any of these sources of funding that could theoretically support additional services if there's no housing in which to put people who would then receive these services.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. So that's our leveraging piece. So we'll need to sort of make a decision at some point if we want to make available, you know, up to 15 vouchers was kind of what we were thinking is a maximum. If we want to put that on the table, we can do that, Madam Chair, or unless you'd like to entertain a motion for discussion and vote now.
How are folks feeling about that suggestion? Do we want to just put it on the list and not vote today? Do we need to vote on this more than just be informed about it and start thinking about it?
We would need to vote on it at some point in order to, you know, sort of codify it, I guess. I mean, I guess technically the lead agency could make a decision to do that. I'd prefer to, you know, have some sort of a communication, and whether or not a vote or a consensus, at least make sure everybody's kind of on board that we would use, you know, no more than 10 or 15. And I don't know the number yet. I'm just sort of using 10 to 15 as a rough number that, you know, thinking through where we are and what I'm hearing and what might make sense to help us do that, because we have to leverage all these funds, and that, you know, makes sense to Lloyd and to me, and thinking through how it might work.
My issue is that, like, setting aside, you know, picking a number at this point in the current climate, as Drew was saying, where there are tons of landlords getting out of the housing trust voucher game. You might not have 10 to 15 units to even consider. So is that, you know, is it realistic to pick a number right now, unless we have some things in the works where we feel like, you know, it's going to be a definite, or there's a landlord coming on board, or, you know, I think without that information, it's very difficult to quantify right now, because from what I see in the last 6 to 8 months, I know one provider, a case manager who helps house folks, said she lost 10 landlords. That is huge to lose 10 landlords. And I have at least 2 or 3 patients right now that I'm working with whose current landlords are at the point where they're saying DHA, you need to issue them a new voucher. They need to search. We're not going to accept payments from you guys anymore. And I don't know if that's an overlap or if those are 3 additional landlords that are pulling out.
Sharita, that is distressing to hear. Are they giving reasons why? I mean,
I just think that so I don't know if everybody knows what DHA is like, and Colin knows this. They've had tons of staff turnover. And they're bringing people in, and it's like, it feels like as soon as they get somebody in, they're leaving, or somebody else is leaving from another department, and they're having to do this reshuffling game. And so right now they're really behind. A couple of my clients had problems where DHA or whoever pays the bills, they didn't even pay the bill. Like, they didn't pay the rent. So I don't know if that's because of the staff turnover. Is that due to something else? There's just a lot of things going on. DHA is still not open to the public. You know, you're dropping everything in Dropbox, and that's if you get a communication. And I know that oh my goodness, since the last time we probably had a conversation with someone at DHA, like at an HSAC level or something like that, it's been like ghost. You can't get anybody on the phone. You can't get an email. I have people who are approved on the state side right now with housing pending that we are waiting on DHA to do their part so folks can move in. And it's been weeks that we're waiting for DHA to respond, even acknowledge the fact that they have the documents in their hand. So I don't know what's happening with DHA.
That is very true. That is very true. I maintain my patients' recertifications, and I can't get nobody on the phone. I can't get nobody to come to the door, no matter what time, day, evening I go. That is a major problem.
So I have just a couple of thoughts. Back to the issue of, is this a recommendation that we would like to consider? I like the idea of having a target to work towards. I think that gives us something to really think about and work toward, but I do have concerns about DHA factoring into the equation because of their lack of responsiveness. And my question is, are we seeing the loss of landlords accepting vouchers because of DHA, or is it other factors? Or we really don't know.
So
we're guessing, right?
So I don't think that we're guessing. I think it's a combination. Some of it is DHA, some of it is tenant, because as this goes back to what I was saying early on in this discussion, the housing choice voucher level of housing for chronically homeless folks or people with a lot of challenges, it's very difficult. It's not the appropriate housing level, in my opinion, for a lot of the folks we serve. And right now we're using those vouchers because we have so many difficult to serve people. Those are the persons who's getting the vouchers first right now. It's not like a good mix. There's no balance. We're giving a high needs person a voucher that they're not ready for, and they need a ton of support in order to even, make a good go at it. And a lot of them don't qualify for the level of support that they need to actually make the good go at it. So I think, it's a combination of some of the stuff is DHA, some of the stuff is the housing market. They can demand more, they can get paid more, and the voucher limits their earning potential. And then the other stuff is like tenant issues.
Okay, so it's multifaceted problems. So, Colin, is there an alternative to getting more points other than involving DHA? It sounds like something needs to be considered around case management or supportive services to actually get get the families, or I mean, I'm so used to talking to families, but get the individuals even ready for the ability to move into the houses so that they're not failing. I mean, what can we mitigate? What can we control in this equation?
All right, so I think Tammy, you and Sharita both hit the nail on the head. Is, you know, we have historically been using all of our resources to help the most vulnerable and the hardest to serve. The whole system has been set up and it's doing a great job of helping only the hardest to serve people in the system, which has now created essentially everything has become a permanent supportive housing project. The emergency shelters are full of people who need permanent supportive housing. Rapid rehousing is full of people who need permanent supportive housing and permanent subsidies. The permanent supportive housing programs are set up with people who need permanent subsidies and or supportive services and are unable to move on. I've started working with the prioritization groups to talk through this. And as we've kind of talked about, Sharita and I've talked about it before, is the need to balance the system and the need to say, okay, rapid rehousing is a short to medium term rental assistance. If you know somebody is never going to be able to afford rent on their own, rapid rehousing is probably not the right intervention for that person. So what we're trying to do and slowly having to undo what's been done for the last 18 months to 2 years, the way this has all been prioritized, we're slowly starting to look through and say, okay, here is what we truly can do. And here is, you know, one really high barrier, hard to serve person who's getting rapid rehousing, but we know that this person needs PSH and there's a plan to get them into PSH at some point, but we were able to secure housing for that one person. Now here's some medium barrier folks who really need assistance for, you know, maybe 9 to 18 months. And they're going into rapid rehousing. And then, okay, here's another pot of people who we know only need 1 to maybe 9 months or 6 months of assistance in rapid rehousing, and really better be able to perhaps serve more people, perhaps not annoy all the landlords by only giving them really high barrier, hard to serve folks to choose from. And the hope is, as we bring Housing for New Hope, who's being recommended for an award for a landlord engagement project, helping to give them, you know, some options to help recruit landlords that not everybody coming through is going to have the same level of difficulty in serving. It is true we are losing landlords because they don't want to deal with, you know, the stipulations of third-party payments, fair market rents that limit what they can collect. I am not aware, aside from ILI funds for other housing vouchers, but that group doesn't necessarily always line up with people in the homeless system. Some are, some aren't. Some are in the homeless system, some aren't. And it's how do you get the two to work together and how do you prioritize them together? This is kind of, at this point, given our timeline that this is due, and we have to have HSAC signing off on this in about a month, this was sort of the low-hanging fruit that would allow us to put something on paper and get the points. Does it mean that we're going to have 10 or 15 landlords willing to take these vouchers, even if the funds are awarded? No, but it means that we have them there and we can work towards it. Or it buys us time while this is all scoring to find other ways to fund those units. Perhaps it's, hey, you know what, we're going to build a 10-bedroom shared living space for really hard to serve clients. And we're going to have 24-hour on-site staffing, but it's going to be run more as a permanent supportive housing place with more independence, but more oversight than an emergency shelter. I don't know the answers to these. These are things that, you know, trying to figure out how do we get the, how do we score these? How do we put something together that gets us to helping us to score enough points to try and win some funds? Because this is a competitive nationwide competition. And if we can't put anything on paper, well, there go 10 out of 70 points for us. And there's a minimum score you have to even be considered.
I've been sitting here pondering sort of housing authority, and then Sharita brought some questions or points back up in the chat. I heard in a Coalition for Affordable Housing and Transit meeting the other day, Dan Hudgens, former DSS director and member of CAT and board member at the Housing Authority, said that they are, although there may be vouchers that are underutilized or that are not connected to an actual apartment at this point, they are spending at 100% of their HUD voucher allocation.
Right.
Which was something brand new to me that I had not heard before. And so, you know, we, in a way, these are like ships missing each other in the night. We have, I think we do have a lot of people who have vouchers assigned to them who cannot find an apartment, but DHA doesn't have the money to pay for those apartments anyway. Is that, I mean, could both of those things be true?
Yes. And I can sort of help shed some light on that if you'd like, Drew, from experience of serving on a housing board in another jurisdiction in a previous life.
I would, and then just to kind of just to react to Sharita's need to push DHA for public housing units. I mean, their redevelopment downtown, once it's complete, should have created, you know, both a lot more housing authorities sort of subsidized units and market rate units that help pay for them. But if that's what you mean, or I don't know if you mean that or vouchers or both, Sharita, but.
No, I'm talking about public housing. The public housing push is something that I've been doing the last 11 years being here, trying to get them to open up the public housing units, because I just, you know, whereas it's still DHA property, it's more rent control. There's an ability for the rent to go down to zero if it had to. You know, there are just other mechanisms. There's not a utility bill requirement. It's just so many other things that come with a public housing unit. If I don't have to worry about your rent, I can give you supportive services.
Well, I mean,
I can help you get income. You get what I'm saying? And they have been hesitant to make good on that promise.
So I can share a little bit about that because I've had some conversations with Ashanti at DHA, and there is already a prioritization in their ACOP saying that they will prioritize, I think off the top of my head, I believe it's 5% of their public housing units for people exiting homelessness. And Sharita, you're absolutely right. Over the last 2 years since this got put in their plan, has not been actualized. And we've been pushing and pushing and pushing for them to make those changes a reality. And talking to Ashanti, there's a few pieces to this puzzle that DHA has to do, and steps they have to take is reordering their prioritization list, sending notifications out to everybody on the wait list, letting them know that the prioritization is changing. And the whole system that was developed for this assumed that DHA would have one application portal. So if you were applying for public housing, you would go to one portal. DHA does not have one portal for public housing applications. You have to literally apply at every public housing location to be accepted. So tracking and making this happen is getting tricky because of the complications that we are able to track the 5% across multiple pieces because you have to apply it every place. So Ashanti was saying, you know, by the end of this calendar year, DHA should have some of these pieces up and running. And by first quarter of next year, we might actually start to be able to be referring into those units. So potentially these public housing units could be, you know, used in exchange for vouchers for permanent supportive housing. You know, we could just say, you know, up to 15 public housing units and or HCVs, you know, no more than 15 units would be available for, you know, PSH. And Drew, on your question, that when you may be running under utilized on your vouchers, but your subsidy is more, the subsidy is calculated based on a tenant is not statutorily allowed to pay more than 30% of their adjusted gross income. So as we've seen wages drop and we've seen people not getting back to work as quickly, there's a lot of people who might have zero income. So the subsidy on every one of those units that might have been an average of $700 a month may now become $1,200 a month. Which then if you're having to pay more every month for each of those vouchers, you can easily exceed what you're, because you've got all these vouchers and housing authorities are statutorily obligated to make whole the rent, even if the voucher amount from HUD exceeds what they're awarded.
That makes sense, and I can see how that would work out. You know, it would also make sense, and I know HUD doesn't print money, right? But that, you know, somehow the allocations to local governments should reflect the actual conditions and payments and market rates and so on.
Well, and that's what they do. They say they'll say, all right, here's X number of vouchers, but that's based on HUD saying the fair market rent is, and assuming you're paying 100%. Then
Right.
housing authorities then figure out, okay, how do we translate this into vouchers? They may give out more vouchers because you have to expend all of your funding. So if I give out 100 vouchers for 100, and I'm assuming I'm paying 100% of the rents, but I end up getting 50% of the rent paid back, then I've got more money that I've got to put back into vouchers. So it's a delicate balance of issuing too few vouchers and collecting too much money, and then putting out too many vouchers and not having enough money to cover all of it, should everybody lose their income.
But it is, I feel like this is something that we ought to kind of understand better across the board, in the sense that we seem to be putting a lot of effort, for example, into, I mean, to Sharita's point, you know, I agree, right? We need to stop landlords from dropping out of this. It is important to have landlords who are willing to rent to people with vouchers. But on the other hand, you know, the idea that if we could find landlords for everybody else with a voucher who doesn't have an apartment tomorrow, we could move them in and everybody would be happy, is a complete fiction. and so, you know, I don't know. It was a real revelation to me, and I'm still not exactly sure what to think about it.
Well, you know, that's not exactly how they had to explain it to me, because I thought that you couldn't go over. If you did go over, then the tenant would then be responsible for the overage, because the voucher has a maximum period. And if a person's income is zero, they provide utility assistance, at least for the electricity bill, in the voucher. So you still have to leave room for the electricity bill payment as well within the cap of the voucher. So they had been hesitantly not allowing people to go over. Our issue is that even our market rents are no longer, you know, cheap. People are renting a 1-bedroom apartment for $1,000.
And
so,
Sharita, you're absolutely right. You can't go over the fair market rent. What I'm talking about is that voucher value might be $1,200 and somebody's income might be zero. So whereas historically that $1,200 voucher was only costing DHA maybe $800 a month, is now costing DHA $1,200 a month.
Gotcha.
It's because and that's the thing is, with a housing choice voucher, if I have a voucher and I lose my income, I can go to the housing authority and say, hey, I've lost my income. I expect my income to be, you know, at a reduced level for X number of months as I'm trying to get back on track. Well, DHA can reduce my payment, but DHA isn't able to, you can't just you can't increase rents during a time. So if I get a raise during my voucher year, DHA can't reduce their payment until they go through the recertification at the end of the year. So if I had zero income,
right,
and I'm paying, and DHA is paying $1,200 of my rent, but now all of a sudden I'm making $2,400 a month. Well, for the next 10 months, DHA can't touch any of that $2,400 until recertification.
Right.
So there's a lot of weird nuances in housing vouchers that sort of complicate how it all plays out. So that's where we are. Does that help answer some of the questions?
Yeah, I think maybe I took us off course a little bit, and I apologize for that.
You're fine.
But it's okay, Drew, because these are the conversations we need to have, because people who don't do this every day need to understand how that stuff, we can't just continue just to make decisions. We have to make informed decisions. We don't need to be setting ourselves up for failure. We need to know all of the factors. We need to know, just what's happening and what's happening in the community. Like giving you an update on UMD and giving you an update on DHA. You got to know that so that we can make informed decisions that are actually impactful and actually bring us closer to our goal of ending homelessness in Durham.
Mhm. Yeah. And right now we do have a perfect storm of a lot of, challenges hitting us all at the same time. And it's how do we navigate this? And it's something, since Hanalea left, I've been taking over running the by name list meetings and talking with, case managers, where the answer historically had been, oh, I just put them in rapid rehousing. Oh, I put them here, I put them here. It's like, well, 90% of the people who are on the by name list meeting will never receive a penny of rapid rehousing. They won't receive PSH and they won't receive a housing voucher. So what are we going to do for this 80 to 90% of the people who aren't going to necessarily get any of those funds because there aren't enough, dollars in those buckets to help everybody? And this is where, we're trying to do some training and creative thinking, talking about shared housing, talking about how do we make this work so that we don't have 80 or 90% of the people who are experiencing homelessness remain unsheltered in perpetuity. Creative problem solving.
I put another comment in the chat about the state housing, the targeted housing, and some of the units that are offered through the state under the targeted housing program are multi-bedroom units. And there has been discussions about how we could use those multi-bedroom units to help us. So that would, meaning we could put, 4 people in a 4-bedroom state assisted funded unit. And I think that this is something that we have not done a good job on. I think it's something that we need to look at. And I think, if there are clarifying points that need to be made, I think that I can get the right people to the table for us to have that conversation. We need to be trying to figure out how to get at this thing. And I think there is the option for the individual leases in that 4-bedroom unit. But with state assistance, we really do need to be utilizing it, because I don't know how well they're utilized now.
And that's, Sharita, one of the big things that leveraging health resources, leveraging these housing resources, and going back to this sort of one-page plan. And I'll send this out to you all, but it's sort of getting, you in the room with that knowledge of, hey, who do you know connected to that state housing that can come and help us figure out how do we get this plan together? What can they help us write to help strengthen this application? Because Durham's starting a little bit at a disadvantage because we don't have 30,000 unsheltered individuals in Durham. So we lose out on 30 bonus points right off the get-go. So we really have to strengthen up, all of, our strategy to identify gaps and identifying and prioritizing households. So we're in pretty good shape for some of these items that we have to do. There are some things that we really do need to tighten up and figure out how to leverage if we're going to try and bring in $2 million, and that's $2 million over 3 years. It's not $2 million per year for 3 years. It would be divided out over 3 years, with the expectation and the hope that they would become renewable after that 3-year initial time period. Let's see.
So Colin,
Yes, ma'am.
do we need to be voting on something, or like, I think that we talked about a lot of things and folks are quiet, and I don't know if they're quiet because they don't know what we need to do next, if they're still digesting this information, if they need more time. I'm just trying to gauge kind of where people are around this document and their thoughts about it.
Well,
This
I
is-
think, okay, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Tammy. I'll wait.
Well, I'm just thinking that, you know, we have a real opportunity here to bring in the potential of $2 million over the next several years into Durham. And I feel like maybe we don't have it all figured out at this point, but we're going to have to do something to try, because if we can bring in the money, then that would, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Colin, maybe free up some of the city's money to come in that we leverage toward the very things that we're trying to do here. I like the idea of having a target to shoot for. So I think around the 10 to 15 units is a clear target, because that gives us a little bit of time to start in each of our areas, looking at any potential opportunities, any stone that we can turn over to help us achieve the goal of being able to do this. It seems to me that not doing it would not be a good option, because we would lose out right from the get-go. So we have to at least try to come up with a plan to get the $2 million into the community, even if it means that we have to mix it up a little bit after we are able to bring it in. I think it's also giving us the opportunity to think in ways of leveraging that we've not thought of in the past. Certainly the medical piece. Who are the players in that? Who can we identify that are starting to come forward? You know, even as we're having discussions, preliminary discussions around this. So I think it opens up several opportunities for us to think a little bit differently in how we're reaching the unsheltered. The problem is not going to get better. It's going to get worse. We know that. The data is indicating that it continues to get worse every single month. More landlords pulling out, more homeless on the street. I know even from our shelter, we are housing more families that are the working poor. So we're going to continue to see those families and individuals end up on the street. So we have to come up with some type of a plan, and this starts centering us in the right direction to do that. So I think that I feel comfortable in supporting something that would say we need to go ahead and make a commitment into doing this, and this is the steps that we need to take, and then backing it up with whatever actions that we can possibly do.
This is Heidi, and I think what Tammy said was really well done. I agree with that. We can't not go after the money. And so even if we have some concerns about DHA right now and landlords accepting vouchers, you know, limited landlord units anyway, I think the suggestion of having a target of 15 and moving forward with the plan you've proposed, Colin, is reasonable at this time. This also makes me think that our community really needs to have a plan for how to end homelessness.
And that is part of what this 15-page document that we have to put together is how are we going to start working in that direction? And I appreciate Tammy and Commissioner Carter, the sentiments about we need to go after the money. And I think Tammy alluded to it a minute ago. Some of the funds that can be applied for here can go towards paying for street outreach services. And as you recall, the city and county are jointly funding an unsheltered coordinating agency contract. I don't know who or what people are applying for, but if anybody applied for a street outreach project here, we might be able to repurpose the funds that are paying for UCA out of city and county coffers to go towards additional supportive services or additional, vouchers or whatever it may be. The city and county, as we dig into our data, figure out where that money could also be spent. So I appreciate the sentiments and trying to figure out how do we leverage all this to free up our city and county money. Has the least amount of strings on it. HUD has very specific, you can and you can't, but there's flexibility within those binary rules.
I'm usually the quiet one in most meetings because I'm learning. Every time I'm involved with one of these meetings, I learn so much, and I appreciate everyone. I appreciate all the comments and the explanations and everything that have been proffered so far. As Charita hinted, I am not completely clear what we would be voting on right now. I understand a plan, but I don't understand the details of a plan yet. I hear 10 to 15, but I don't know what that 10 to 15 is based on. I wouldn't want to say that it was just a number that was picked out of the sky. I would like to think that it was based on something, some data or some information that you have.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, I wouldn't be comfortable voting on anything because I still don't completely understand. I understand the NOFO,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't understand a plan that we have for this NOFO yet.
Sure. And part of, you're right, because the plan hasn't been fully written yet. So we're not asking you to vote on a full plan of any of this. Asking for sort of, would the Policy and Planning Committee feel comfortable making available 10 to 15 housing choice vouchers or public housing slots if they were to become available, if funding came in to pay for the supportive services out of this. That's what I'd be asking for at this point, so that we could put into the plan and we could start writing an MOU to get that signed and in place, which would become part of the overall NOFO that will come back to Policy and Planning and or HSAC, because the HSAC is going to have to sign off on this whole thing at the September meeting. So in order for us to keep working on the plan, I didn't feel comfortable and the homeless team didn't feel comfortable saying, yes, we're going to go start writing an MOU to allocate housing choice vouchers without some consultation with Policy and Planning. And I think, Charita, I appreciate you bringing up the public housing. That was something that I had forgotten about because we've been dealing with it for so long. So I think, putting it in there that we use either or gives us flexibility, but it also perhaps gets us to that 15 number. To your question, Helen, about how do we arrive at that 15? In my last conversation with Danita Johnson at DHA, she shared that we have 225 vouchers are available to us. They're not set aside, but they are available if they are available for us. And I asked how many of these are we currently using? She didn't have the exact number, would have to do some digging to find it out. But she said her recollection was less than 200 of the 225 are in use right now. Keep in mind, we've got a whole lot of emergency housing vouchers that are above that 225 mark. So given that her rough estimate was less than 200, my assumption was 10 to 15, even if we were a little bit over the 200, seemed like a reasonable number. And getting 10 to 15 more units of permanent supportive housing on board would be a substantial financial investment, which would help us to leverage this, because HUD is looking for, if you're applying for $2 million over 3 years, they want to see you bringing in at least $1 million over the same 3-year period from other resources that are helping to address the problem. So your, $2 million commitment from HUD is really $3 or $4 or $5 million of actual commitments on paper. Does that answer your question, Helen? I see your hand, Drew.
Go ahead.
No, Helen, we should wrap up your question first.
Certainly. So in case I've missed a point somewhere, I believe we were talking about DHA said that they didn't have money to support the permanent supportive housing vouchers they already have. Did I misunderstand that? And would this be providing additional funding for 10 to 15 vouchers, or I'm lost one?
That's a good point. This would be included within that 225 that are available to the homeless continuum of care as is. So we're not asking, and I was hoping we could go from 225 to 240 with 15, but they were like, we're not able to make that jump right now financially. What if you used some of that 225 to make available to this and set it aside? And I was like, that might, while it's not ideal, and we don't want to make perfection the enemy of good, to be able to get something across the finish line to get $2 million, that it seemed to make sense to sort of say, okay, we could do this. Does it mean, and this, the other piece is, once we put it in the application, once we have sort of this MOU in place, if we run into problems and it's not able to happen and we get the funding, this is where we may have a plan B that is also, we use the state housing option that Sharita found, or we might have other funding sources that we can develop that end up saying, hey, we went in thinking we were using 16 DHA units, but once we actually started doing this, we ended up actually using alliance funds and state funds and something else instead. As long as we kind of come up with 15 units, we need something on paper to say this is our plan. Obviously, plans and reality sometimes change, and we need to be aware that that might happen. I don't think we would be comfortable saying we're going to go put 30 units of PSHN, saying 15 from DHA and 15 from another source. But I think if we sort of say, hey, we're planning to commit 15 units, and this is how we think we're going to do it right now, so that we can check the box and get the points, would be advantageous to us, knowing that we may have to shift the plans as we start working through it. And hey, maybe there's only 5 DHA units available and we find 10 somewhere else.
Thank you.
Drew.
Thanks. I have sort of, thinking about the housing authorities, I'm trying to kind of put 2 and 2 together, right? I mean, they basically don't have extra money in their HCV system. We are asking them to create more kind of homeless preference vouchers. It occurred to me that the homeless preference vouchers are probably the most expensive, in the sense that those folks are the most likely to have no outside income at all. And so it might actually, I mean, I'm just curious whether these kind of conversations happen within the housing authority, whether it might actually be a strategy not to deal with very many of those because they can't spread their money as far. Does that seem possible to folks?
That's where I am. I struggle with the number that they come up with and how they kind of come up with that number, and how potentially if our folks have no income, how does that impact the number? And it just seems like, in so many reasons, it makes more sense for them to be willing to give us more public housing units than a voucher for our chronically high need level folks who may not have income yet. That just, it just doesn't make sense to me, but we get this number.
Yeah, it seems like they are in the process, right, of creating those. I think it's over 1,000 additional public housing units downtown, but it's going to take 10 or 15 years to do it. In the meantime, I'm just kind of curious about their dynamics, right, and how it might be, from their point of view, a rational decision to use as few as possible actually, right? I mean, like theoretical dedications of this number over here and this, but to actually kind of be funding as few emergency housing or homeless preference vouchers as possible, because they're the most expensive and they reduce that finite pot of funding the most, and mean that, you know, people who do have enough income, right, to basically pay for half of their rent, you know, you can only fund half as many people if you're paying 100% of the rent, right? And so it might be a rational decision on the housing authority's part to at least from one vantage point, you know, in terms of spreading resources out as much as possible, to not really deal with as, you know, very many super poor people.
Some of that, I think, goes back to also how we on the continuum have been prioritizing. Some of the reason we're in the bind that we're in is based on the way we referred folks to all these various resources. And we've kind of systematically painted ourselves into a box by putting everybody with no income, everybody who says they have a disabling condition, into all these long-term programs. And disabling condition for HUD is very different than qualifying for Social Security disability income. Qualifying for Social Security disability income, Sharita knows this way better than I do, is a very high bar to cross. And qualifying as a disabling condition for permanent supportive housing basically requires that I have a expert in their field signing off that, yes, this person has a severe depression, making it very difficult to work. Well, severe depression, there's a lot of people with incredibly severe depression who go to work every day. They may not work full time, but they work some. And that may not meet the bar of qualifying for disability income. So we've kind of built this whole system on people who may not be able to actually get income and are relying on a disability that has no income, and they just aren't going to go back to work. And we're going to have to spend some time with the case managers trying to think through, motivate, get connected to mental health, get connected to all these other folks to try and help people find sources of income to be able to pay rent and utilities and living expenses. And my hope is that we as a community can sort of take a step back and balance our system and balance our referrals so that we don't end up with everybody struggling and everybody losing rapid rehousing vouchers at the same time, with nowhere for them to go.
So Colin, it sounds like to me, if nobody else wants to say anything as far as it relates to this, that there are some that feel like we should go ahead and move forward, and there are others that don't know what we need to do right now. But you need something for September. So what are our alternatives?
I think at this point, the question is this group comfortable sort of targeting either 10 or 15? I'm going to leave that for you all to decide. I would say 15 seems reasonable for us because we're not even looking at, and these 15 would only be used if and only if we receive funding through this NOFO. If we don't get any money from HUD through this NOFO, then those housing units would just go back to the way we were planning to use them anyway. So there's not really a big risk in this, except for possibly bringing along, I mean, the benefit would be having some additional PSH, which is desperately needed in the community. The risk of not doing it is it's going to be hard for us to get something codified to be part of our application that we have to turn in and show the completed application to HUD in October. And we want to share as many details as we can with the HSAC at the September meeting. So
So what's the commitment? I mean, if we say 10 or we say 15, is
Mhm.
that in the next? Because we just picked some numbers not too long ago. What were those numbers for that challenge?
Oh, those are for this calendar year. The rapid rehousing and affordable housing units.
You're talking those 160, it was like 165 or
But that
something
was-
like that, right?
Yeah, that was rapid rehousing. And I forget the number of affordable units that were coming online that fell outside of the homeless scope. These would not become available until probably, at the soonest, my guess would be July of 2023. So we'd be making this commitment over the next 3 years, from 2023 to 2026. And we could even say it's, up, we're making available 5 units per year for each of those 3 years if we wanted to scale it down, but still keep that 15 number.
It seems like maybe one of the things we're talking around kind of is that we on this call do not have the authority to set aside housing authority units or to make sure, right, current vouchers actually result in formerly homeless people being in a unit, right? All these sort of dedicated vouchers are theoretical.
No,
And we're not the ones who have the authority to kind of,
we actually do, Drew. On these, we're talking about using that 225 that are available to the continuum of care. These are the ones that we refer directly to. And we're talking about using the 5% of the public housing units that are set aside for preference for people exiting homelessness. So we're talking about two things that we actually have verification and certification that, yes, we're certifying that this person meets this criteria. So we're not talking about things outside of that 5% that has already been allocated to us and those 225 vouchers that are made available to us. We're just talking about, do we as a continuum want to restrict, for lack of a better term, some small percentage of those, 5% out of, I forget how many public housing units DHA has, but I think it's over 1,000.
So you're saying we're dedicated, we are like out of our pot, we are dedicating or committing ourselves to 15 units for people who are literally homeless and ending their homelessness, using all of these tactics that are listed on this one pager? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, this is part of it. I'm talking about the units that we're using would be specifically for like permanent supportive housing, because or people exiting homelessness, however we want to look at it. We can leave it vague that we're using this to get unsheltered individuals out of homelessness, to exit homelessness. We can at a later date target it down for PSH if we wanted to, or we could leave it for high barrier individuals or others who may not meet the permanent supportive housing definition that HUD has. There's a few ways that we can look at it as we start to operationalize it. Right now, it's sort of saying, do we want to commit to using, a combination of housing choice vouchers or public housing units for 15 of the total units available, or 15 of the vouchers, or 7 vouchers and 8 public housing units to exit people specifically for this project. That's all we're looking for, is 15 out of the 225 vouchers, and out of, assuming DHA has only 1,000 public housing units, that's 50 units there. We'd be talking about, 5 or 10 out of each, or whatever. Out of the set aside that's already there for the COC to help prioritize.
It seems like if we want to try to secure this funding, that we need to make this decision. And it seems like, even though I don't have a good understanding at all, but our community's plan is to end homelessness. It sounds like, Colin, you're saying we're just asking, we're being asked to, you know, support, I guess, your proposal that of these vouchers that we already get for the continuum of care, that we set aside 15 of them in order to apply for this funding
Yes.
and better serve people with services that we can then fund. And
Yes.
I think we should support that.
And these 15 units will be part of the larger plan. This will be, you know, a portion of that 15-page plan that we have to put together. And when Lloyd returns tomorrow, he'll probably be sending an email to the full committee as well, inviting you to join the planning sessions over the next couple of weeks to put together this 15-page plan that we're going to be pulling together stakeholders of. So it'll all come together as we start getting all the appropriate voices in the room together. And we're doing listening sessions and getting input from people with lived experience. Last week, Lloyd went to Open Table Ministries and spoke with a group of folks who are there experiencing unsheltered homelessness to get input from them. What's working, what's not working, what's needed. So as we start getting more and more data, we'll start putting more meat on the bones, proverbially. Yeah, Drew.
Let me just see if I can ask the question for the group in a different way, right? Are we asking ourselves, should we get some of this additional money? Would we want to use some of it, right? Sort of contingent on our receiving of that money, would we set aside some of our homeless preference units to be basically PSH units located at the housing authority? Is that kind of what we're asking ourselves? Am I frozen? Did somebody answer?
You're not frozen.
Colin, is that
I think
what we're
that's
asking?
true. I think that's true, Drew. Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, in that respect, right, should we get this money for supportive services? That sounds to me like a perfectly good way of using it, right? We have a bunch of high needs folks in our continuum. And if we have the authority to kind of make sure those vouchers are used and get people into units, then of course it seemed to me to make all kinds of sense to devote some supportive service money to make sure they can get service. So if that's what we're asking ourselves, I'm totally in favor of doing that.
So I will entertain a motion at this time.
Yes.
We have 8
yes,
minutes.
yes.
And I think there's one other thing on here that I don't think we're gonna get to. Do we need to, Colin?
No, the other
Okay.
thing, so let's get this one cleaned up, and then I can do a very high level overview of the next item, and we can tackle it. It'll probably be easier to tackle at the next meeting anyway. So
Okay.
let's go ahead and get this voted on, and then I'll give you an update on the next piece.
I will entertain a motion at this time regarding the NOFA for unsheltered homelessness.
Okay,
Drew, you're shaking your head. Is that your motion?
Drew, do you want to make the motion or?
So I think what I'm saying is that's not the whole part of our response to this, right? That's just a piece of it.
Correct. Here
Okay,
would be the motion, is that the motion would be something along the lines of to set aside or to make available, because that's the wording DHA uses, to make available 15, a combination, not to exceed 15. I want to get it not to exceed. To make available 15 units of public housing or housing choice vouchers available to people exiting homelessness if the supplemental NOFO funding is awarded.
I see.
That's essentially what we're trying to do, is saying a combination of public housing or housing choice vouchers will be available to people exiting homelessness if funding is available through this supplemental NOFO.
So this maybe is slightly more complicated, right? in a way, right, our backup might be to attach these supportive scholars to units we already control, right? If we can't get, right, we've been talking about how we're not sure we can really rely on the housing authority to be responsive or to say yes to this. If they don't, is our backup plan to devote these supportive scholars and services to units we already control? If we can't get 10, 15 more from the housing authority?
What was your response, Colin?
I was gonna say, I think if we leave it vague, we could sort of do it either way, Drew.
Okay,
Either the ones that maybe somebody's already entered into or new. But essentially, we kind of have control over both. We kind of have control over referring it. I did, Reginald Johnson and I met with Danita and Anthony Scott last week and talked to them about this. And they were willing to sort of sign on for it, assuming it didn't create additional vouchers that they may not have access to. If it was staying within our parameters of what we have already agreed to with them, and we're sort of further flushing out that we want to use them in this way, they would be fine signing. So I don't think we're gonna have a problem with DHA signing an MOU.
okay. Then yes, I'm happy with your formulation of the motion. And I move that.
I second that.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded, right?
Oh, I'm just talking and it was on mute. You seconded the motion, right, Tammy?
Sure.
All those in favor, put yes in the chat box. Noes and anyone abstaining have the same right. It looks like the motion carried, Colin.
Woohoo. Thank you all very much for that. And thank you for the really good discussion. I think that was I hope others feel this was a good use of time to sort of talk these things through. But if you feel otherwise, let me know that as well, so we can think through meetings.
Okay, then you want to move to that last item?
The
or
last,
you-
yep,
yeah,
the
go
the
ahead.
last item is, as you all are aware, we have written standards that we have to follow throughout the continuum of care. And the written standards that we've had in place for a bazillion years needed to be cleaned up administratively to get rid of references to the VI SPDAT that we don't use anymore, to take out, language that's no longer used by HUD, to really reflect better what it is that we do and how we do it. We also had to include language about our emergency solutions COVID funds. So the previous written standards document was something like 39, 45 pages, something like that. We've gone through, cleaned out items, and we need to sort of have the new updated versions approved for two reasons. One, it's required to go in with our state ESG application. So we would rather send a clean, updated version than the version we've been sending for the last several years. And second of all, the city of Durham is going to be monitored for ESG CV funds in September by HUD. So we want to make sure we've got, the most up-to-date written standards in place for that monitoring as well. So what I would like to do is send all of you this document, and at our September meeting, see if we can get that approved and make the recommendation that HSAC approve it at the September 14th meeting. Would that be acceptable to all of you? So it gives you a chance to read it. It's pretty light reading for help you fall asleep, probably.
Sure.
Okay. So
Sounds
we will,
good.
then we will get that out to you by the end of this week so that you've got plenty of time to read it. And we'll also, I'll dig in and get the unsheltered count and send that out. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else. Sharita, do you have anything?
I'm sorry, I was multitasking, so I missed something. But so everybody is clear that Colin wants us to go back and review this for discussion in September. Is that what you said, Colin?
Yes, I'm going to send it. I'm going to send out send out, we'll get that sent out this week to the group. I just sent you the version, Sharita, yesterday, so that you could just sort of be aware of it. But we don't need to do anything with it today. We'll take it up in September.
Sounds good. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Amy
I-
moved.
I'll second.
It's been seconded. You guys have a great, great day, and I'll see you in September. Well, I'll see you before then, but in our next meeting in September as well. Bye-bye.
That's good.
Thanks,
Bye, all.
guys. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.